Ahmed, thank you so much for jumping on this morning.
It's my pleasure, Phil. Thank you so much for having me.
I will let you do your own intro because I'm not good at those. I'll do my own. I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webisoft. We build custom software and try to meet interesting people in industries we're interested in. Uh, Today, my guest is from Empower. Ahmed, do you want to take a couple minutes to kind of set up who you are, what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Phil. So my name is Ahmed Abdul-Jaleel. I am the Chief Compliance Officer at Empower Investments, which includes our institutional investment advisor and our mutual funds. That comprises approximately $80 billion in assets under management. I've been with Empower for approximately a year. And prior to that, I worked at the US Securities and Exchange Commission for about 15 years, conducting regulation of investment funds and investment advisors. Just to tell you a little bit about Empower, Empower is a multidiscipline financial services firm. We primarily do a lot of retirement plan service providing work, but then also have multiple investment advisors, broker dealer, insurance business. And we actually have a Canada connection. So our parent company is Great West Life Co. and Canada
Oh, no
Life
way.
is one of our affiliates who you may be familiar with. And then
Yes.
we're all part of the Power Corporation company of families.
Oh, no way. Okay. I didn't even make that connection. How interesting. Well, thank you for the rapport with, with us in Canada up north. So you made the switch from essentially, I guess, the SEC to the I guess the private sector. Like, what made you make that switch?
So about a year ago, there were various changes going on within the administration
I
from a
wonder what
federal
that could be
government
like. Yeah.
perspective. And at that time, I kind of assessed my own career trajectory. I had been at the SEC for quite some time. I was fortunate to move up in the organization, but also was open to trying other roles. And a former mentor and someone I worked with at the SEC. And I connected around that time, and he put me in touch with the person who's now my current boss. And it's been a great experience. I've always been on the sort of outside of firms. So I started my career as an auditor at
Hmm.
Deloitte and conducted audits of financial services firms. And then I spent many years as a regulator. Now being in-house, it's a totally different perspective, but I can use a lot of the experience I had from before to apply in my current role.
Right. And I guess you still interact with them as part of your job.
Absolutely. I've many close friends still at the SEC here in the Chicago office where I sit, as well as in DC. And fortunately, just connected with a bunch of folks from the SEC at a conference I was at last week as well. So it's a tightly knit group, both with current and alumni from the agency. But it's a great group of folks to know and great resources.
Does having that background help you kind of navigate the day-to-day issues on the private sector? Like, obviously you have, you kind of know what's expected on the other side, I guess, more or less, right? Depending on the direction the admin is taking it, obviously, but yeah.
Absolutely. I think regardless of changes in administration, there are some fundamental aspects of examination, inspection, sort of regulatory oversight that stay consistent throughout. And so to that end, even if the sort of main priorities of the SEC might shift year to year or rulemaking scales back, there's a core aspect of the compliance that still continues over time. And to that end, yes, absolutely. Sort of having that prior perspective, having conducted hundreds of examinations of investment firms of varying sizes, as big as us, larger, even smaller. That does help when I'm in discussions with business partners in my organization to share. Their question is always, well, we're launching this new product. What are the regulatory implications of that? And to be able to practically say, seen this type of fact pattern before, by analogy, would apply here, and here are some considerations. Here's what we should think through from a risk perspective. That perspective is something that they value and appreciate fully.
Mm. How hard is it to, talk about or plan for regulations? Like business obviously likes stability, in general. Do you feel like it's always a moving target with the, admin changes and then obviously adaptations on the regulatory sides? Like, how do you make a long-term plan if you're not sure what's going to be allowed and not allowed?
That's an excellent question. I can give you a couple of practical examples about that. And you're absolutely right. It is very difficult to project, a year, 2, 4 years from now, what is the regulatory landscape going to look like? Because the pendulum is always swinging. So prior to the current administration, under the Gary Gensler era for the SEC, it was a very enforcement heavy, rulemaking heavy type of agenda for the agency. And there were a number of new rules sort of on the horizon that companies like us were already planning for. One example of that is there's an anti-money laundering rule that was going to be going into effect 2026 for US-based investment advisors. And so we have made long strides to get sort of like the right resources in place from a hiring standpoint, technology, et cetera. And then the rule got deferred for a couple of years. So then all of a sudden, we have, from a staffing perspective, we're trying to figure out, redeploying those resources, technology, budget, things like that were allocated. And so, yes, when the pendulum is constantly swinging, it does create challenges in terms of mapping out. So what does the regulatory landscape really look like? Another example quickly was around 14 or 15 rules that were proposed by the prior administration that the current administration just wiped away.
Yeah.
So the industry was already gearing up to comply with those, and now they're gone. Having said that, though, I think what remains, and this is something that I've shared in sort of different industry forums, is even if the pendulum swings back and forth like that, even if we're currently in a time right now at the SEC where their staffing is down, the rulemaking has scaled back, the enforcement activity has scaled back, it's still a good time to sort of like take a look internally and to strengthen an internal compliance program. And there are ways to go about doing that just to ensure appropriate governance is in place, processes are well thought out. And as we kind of continue to build upon using AI, and many firms are using AI for various aspects of compliance and regulation now, among other things, figuring out where does that fit in, where does the human in the loop aspect fit in, and ultimately where does that take us in terms of putting the company in the best position from a compliance perspective, knowing well that the pendulum often always swings back the other direction at some point in time.
Yeah, whenever there's a party change.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I guess that's true like worldwide, right? Like it's
Uh-huh.
often, and that's why like progress sometimes is difficult, is new guys come in, undo whatever was done, and then repeat every every couple of years. Um, from a compliance perspective, or maybe from your perspective, like what's the best use of AI currently?
I think we're just cracking the surface, and you probably hear this from a lot of folks, but to give you a sense of what we're currently using it for, or I'll share with you even what I use it for on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
So within our organization, we have an AI tool that's an enterprise-wide tool. We have about 12,000 employees, about 6,000 of them have access to the tool, and we're still rolling out additional user licenses.
Hmm.
For me, where it's very helpful is within the federal securities laws, there are various nuances on specific sort of like granular issues that the guidance for that from a regulator might be buried in some obscure footnote in some release from some document long ago.
Right.
And so the research aspect has been really good. Some of these tools have a deep research or a thinking sort of type research capability, and I find that to be helpful. I also, have used it often for document review. So in my role, I'm routinely preparing materials for our board of directors on a quarterly or annual basis. And so just to get a perspective or just an independent review, I will, share sort of like, here's my draft of the document, and it gives me good feedback, and it gives me, here are questions the board might ask you, and often those are some of the questions that I'll ultimately get asked. So it definitely helps from a preparation standpoint. in addition, so within our organization, we do a lot of due diligence for our service providers and firms that we work with, including investment firms. And so we are figuring out right now what AI technologies can we use, whether third party or develop internally, to leverage sort of conducting this overall oversight that we do for all these different firms. So those are just a few examples across many that we have. We're a very a fairly large organization, and so we have a lot of marketing materials that need to get reviewed, and there are numerous regulatory rules around what type of marketing, what type of language, and what type of data, performance data, and things like that can be provided to customer or clients. And so we have third party marketing tools that use AI to sort of conduct a preliminary review, and then we have the human in the loop aspect of our some of our staff and the marketing team will conduct reviews of information that of that marketing information as well. So those are just a few of the compliance use cases. One interesting use case I heard from our business overall. So I mentioned earlier, we are a retirement plan service provider. So we have
Mm-hmm.
a big call center where the plan investors will call in for purposes of distribution or whatever it might be. So one of the ways that we are training our call center folks is they will had a conversation with an AI irate customer, or a type of just that where they can go back and forth. The customer has an issue or may have a complaint, the AI customer, and so the manager then will sort of participate and listen in on this call with the person getting trained, and then be able to provide feedback on kind of what went well and what things to consider if that was an actual person that was on the other line. And I heard this demo and I was so impressed because it really does come off as just an actual person,
Yeah.
and sort of plays off the comments that are being provided.
Yeah, I've had some conversations on the phone that I wasn't sure, honestly. Have you played with? Do you know Bordy? The
I'm not familiar with that.
So
Yeah.
Bordy is an AI that it started as a matchmaker, I think. Like essentially, you sent it an email, called you, got like the basic info about you. Like so, in your case, chief compliance officer. Like here's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in like talking to people that do X, right? And then obviously then Bordy makes a huge network of connections and we'll start matchmaking. Hey, you should meet that person. You should meet that person. And the conversation is like, that was a while ago too. Like, and it sounded pretty natural. So I assume it got much better. And now like it's doing all kinds of stuff. Like I think it raised a fund or it kind of like, it became a whole thing. But you just gave me an idea about like so we're looking at how do we make our interview process go faster, and I'm feeling like I should probably use an agent or something to do like the preliminary questions.
It's interesting because I always hear that from a candidate perspective. Um, if it's a remote interview, for example, the candidate may have sort of ChatGPT up on the side or
Oh
some
yeah.
AI
Oh
and
yeah.
putting in questions real time as they go, and then it's generating
Hmm.
responses, and then they're kind of going back and forth. But you know, it would be funny if it's really AI.
That's why you have a camera on, and then you see them responding like this, that they're
Yeah, it would be funny
disqualified.
if it's AI. Somehow AI
AI versus
interviewing and
AI.
AI effectively.
Well, for us as a service provider, when ChatGPT came out, there was an epidemic of like all the clients were sending us briefs or RFPs written by AI, and then some of our guys were also too eager to use AI, so they responded with like an AI scope. So at the end of the day, like you sign a contract and neither party knows what we're doing.
That's
It's
hilarious and
yeah.
very emblematic of the times we live in.
I mean, it for sure is a thing, right? And it's kind of, dead internet theory and all that.
Right.
Is a bit in that direction. What's the most frustrating part about your job?
I would say change management is always something that is a struggle. And I'm newer to the organization. Many of my peers are also newer to the organization. And as we work with, teams that of folks that have, been with the organization for a longer period of time, um, and as we work towards trying to mature our compliance program and make improvements, there definitely is some aspect of, oh, well, this is the way we did it last year. And a lot of times when I hear that, I try to reframe the conversation to say, I definitely acknowledge that. I mean, it makes sense. Here's another perspective, and trying to get the buy-in from our team members to really walk through versus forcing it and it becoming more of an unnatural process. And so I think recognizing change is a long horizon time period. I've only been with the organization a year. I think we've made certain improvements, but we have a long way to go from initiatives or goals that I have for my team and the compliance responsibilities that we have. So that's really a big one that comes to mind is, at the end of the day, we're all people, we're all humans, and we're all, except AI, but we're all trying to, folks are trying to just, make a best effort and do what they can from a day-to-day standpoint. And I think there certainly can be a view of, feeling threatened or, feeling concerned about, oh, there are all these changes going on in the department or the organization. But again, I think I try to approach it from the standpoint of, hearing folks out, hearing concerns, but then also trying to gently nudge or kind of like shift the perception of these are positive changes that will help our brand, help our organization, help improve compliance for Empower. And so ultimately it makes us a stronger team and a stronger culture from a compliance standpoint.
From my own experience with compliance and just, I used to have a short stint as a small partner in payment compliance company, right? Um, and I guess one of the frustrations was compliance is sometimes like an afterthought of, if there's no problem or you're not under audit or, like there's no short-term consequences, it's kind of brushed aside as a recommendation more than a, thing that needs to be done.
Uh-huh.
Do you have trouble kind of pushing, that agenda internally where guys, like, if we don't do this, like, this is going to be a problem in 3 years?
Thankfully, within Empower, I genuinely have felt compliance is not an afterthought. It is part of the business. It is, in fact, from a reporting line standpoint, in many compliance teams, you report either to legal or to risk. We actually report into the business,
Mm,
and we are partner, sort of like, from what I've seen, when a new product is being considered, there's someone from compliance at the table, providing perspective, and then kind of like from beginning, middle, and throughout, and then after launch as well. So that's been my experience, at least in the last year I've been here. But having said that, I have seen many, many, many situations where that's not the case. And what will happen in those situations where compliance is an afterthought, like you described, is there is real regulatory risk that's out there. Just to give you a very quick example, I remember an SEC investigation that related to uh, a due diligence of an investment firm and a product, and ultimately sort of the recommendation from internally was to no longer continue that business relationship with that particular firm. Well, that firm then pushed back to senior leaders in the organization and essentially bypassed the governance process. And ultimately that resulted in the SEC conducting an investigation and ultimately fining the firm for not having an adequate due diligence and governance process for that particular firm. So there are real
yeah.
consequences of, not including compliance or not having compliance involved. Having said that, I'll flip it the other direction, which is there are I've seen in my career, particularly at the SEC, there are situations where compliance becomes too much of a hurdle for the
Mm-hmm.
business, and then they kind of like naturally bypass, which is also a problem. And so we try to, my boss and I and our team try to approach it from the perspective of we provide advice and guidance to our business partners, and we are there to say not necessarily no immediately, but maybe not yet.
Right.
Let's hold off on this for now. Let's take some time to analyze it. what are the implications, and then sort of come back with, here are the 3 key risks that you really need to consider from a business perspective before making this decision. And if it's, depending on the nature of the issue, if it's something very significant and, legal is involved or others, then maybe the landscape sort of changes and, it is more of a no. But I think there are other firms where compliance is more of a got you, oh, like you did this wrong.
Right.
We saw this email of yours or this. We try not to take that approach in the sense that we're certainly monitoring and everyone knows, but we try to kind of focus on, again, like the human, the person to person relationships within the organization, such that if I know my business partners well and I, have had dinner with them, sort of like they know me and I know them. So if I tell them, 6 months later, hey, this is an issue that you may need to consider, it carries more weight versus just, oh, those people from compliance, like they're always saying no to this, and it causes more of a friction between business and compliance.
Right. Because, like it depends on, I guess, I'd be curious to hear about like how you view innovation as a firm, right? And how, how do you innovate and maybe get into some gray areas or, undiscovered country and then still maintain compliance? Like, is that a hard thing to do?
Definitely, because in theory, they both run against each other, right? Like
Correct. Yeah.
innovate new products, I don't know, new technology tools, and compliance is more, hey, what would the regulators say? And
Even AI is, like
yeah,
like
exactly.
where's that data
But
going really?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I would say I think there are ways to bridge the gap. And I think ultimately it's not necessarily about the speed at which things are rolled out. And within financial services, from what I've seen, even just being internal for a year, but then also um, being working in the industry for several years, financial services is very fast paced. There's always something new around the corner. Many industries are, but I think in financial services is as well. And so there are ways to innovate um, while still having certain guardrails and sort of taking a methodical approach versus just kind of going all in full speed on something. And just to give you a couple of specific examples. So one area where things are really changing right now is, particularly within the US, there is this opening up access to private funds for retail investors. And that's
Okay.
something that Empower has been sort of involved with, and there have been articles about it as well. I think as I think about it from my own personal view and just previously being a regulator, there are potential risks for a retail investor to be locked into a private equity fund for 10 years with high fees, and they don't understand how to get their money out, things along those lines. At the same time, figuring out what's the most optimal way for that innovation to happen while having these guardrails in place where these investors are still protected and they get the
Hmm.
information they need. Um, it's it's a real challenge. I think another area is certainly digital assets. We currently are not dabbling in that area, but as you've probably heard from the SEC or just within the industry, it's been such an interesting change. So 2 years ago, firms like Vanguard or others were, there were articles saying like, we're never going to touch
Uh-huh.
crypto, digital
Yeah.
assets, no. And now many of them, Vanguard, Schwab, Invesco, just naming, larger firms in the industry, just they're in that space. And, I do wonder personally, like at what point, we'll start to take a look in that area as well. But I mean, the SEC has certainly really pushed hard to kind of like recently they put out new guidance on what type of digital assets become an investment security.
Yeah.
And so I personally have never invested in a digital asset because I still don't completely understand exactly what I'm investing in. That's just me. But as it's volatile. We've certainly seen that. And what does that mean from a compliance perspective in terms of risk for firms who are offering that product to their clients? And then secondly, what does it mean from an investor standpoint? I mean, do does a typical retail investor really understand what they're investing in when they invest in a digital asset? So getting back to your original question, I think innovation is constantly happening, and even this use of I mean, that's another innovation within compliance. And one interesting thing I had heard recently is there is this concept of not only third party oversight. So like if we have vendors for valuation or investment firms or things like that, it's a third party and will conduct the oversight. But now compliance needs to do fourth party oversight, which is essentially if those vendors are using AI, what type of data is going to that AI, and how much exposure does my firm have regarding that fourth party AI firm
Right.
that's servicing, sort of like all the way through the chain.
Audit the auditors.
Right, exactly. So that has been, it's fascinating. I don't think there's a clear answer for it just yet, but I think these are the types of issues that are constantly coming up. And I'm sure during the time of we're having this conversation, there's probably some new innovation that's being launched somewhere in the financial services world, and we'll hear
Probably
about it.
a new Claude version
Yeah,
came out.
right. So it's all about just balancing, just having some level of oversight and understanding of what is all the innovation happening, and then ultimately ensuring we have a defensible method to think about it, to have policies around it, and to, to the extent we permit it, to sort of like still have the ongoing oversight.
What are you most excited about that's coming in the next few years that you see coming on your radar that you think, oh, this is going to be a game changer?
It's an excellent question. I mean, I'm just going to default back to AI again, because again, I think that the possibilities of what I just imagine a year or two ago, what was possible. I remember when I first had ChatGPT on my phone, but we weren't allowed to use it for
Four
work.
years,
And
4 years ago,
yeah,
ChatGPT,
however,
something like
right,
that.
however many years ago it was, but up until, a couple of years ago, a lot of companies had very strict policies like do not, use any sort of AI for anything. And now
Mm-hmm.
it's completely shifted.
It's almost irresponsible if you're not using it now. Like
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. You're behind if
Yep.
you're not using it now, or it's not something that's part of your work. So yeah, I have to say, I mean, I think sort of along the same lines of the example I was sharing of like that call center and just sort of like that training. I wonder like what is all under development right now that maybe
Yeah.
we'll hear about in 6 months or a year, and how drastically is that just gonna sort of like shift, or enhance, shift things from a compliance perspective. But yeah, that I was at this financial services conference last week, and literally every single panel, even if they had varying subjects, there was discussion on some sort of AI aspect. And it's just so interesting, like a year, 2, 3 ago, like that was not the case.
And yeah, of course. And like, yeah, just think of which GPT version or even Claude like 2 years ago. Like I remember trying it. I wasn't so impressed, and now it's my daily. And then you think about the versions that are public are a couple generations behind what the actual AI companies are using, or maybe what the Department of Defense is using. To that end, like I do wonder, like how much of what's happening in the world is driven by AI actually, right? Like if we're a couple gens behind and something out there is much more intelligent, right? Is it all kind of playing a puppet master a little bit with decision making? Who knows? Maybe this podcast is a result of Claude whatever version.
I mean, you're ready. Anything's possible. If a friend of mine sends me a video, I mean, the thought occurs to me, if it's something forwarded or whatnot, it's like, is this AI
Is this
generated? Is this
real?
real?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know anymore. But yeah,
So,
it's
some are not
you're
obvious. Some are obvious. Like sometimes our mother-in-law sends me a video like, look, And it's so obvious that it's, like, and so, okay, she falls for that.
Sure.
But then, even for me, like I'm using, AI daily and it's my work, and sometimes I look at videos and like, man, I can't, I'm really not sure. Right. Final question for you, Ahmed, today. If you could invent any piece of software for your company and your role specifically that would make your life that much easier, what would it be?
I would love a dashboard of all compliance related areas and sort of a green, yellow, red of where risks exist, and something where I could just see where the issues are and sort of dig in and find out, oh, there was this one piece of marketing material, there was some issue related to it, or there's some new product being launched and needs to touch base with someone. I think right now information generally is just scattered in different vendors, databases, systems, some manual processes. And if there was a way magically to integrate all of that into one screen, I would love it.
Is there a way?
I've seen some examples
Yeah.
of some firms that have created something to that end. Um, I think purchasing and integrating something like that is easier said than done. But I think there are tools that are getting developed out there that are AI compliance
Yeah.
tools, and there's more. There's a lot of innovation happening in that space, certainly, and many vendors that I saw at this conference a week ago, they used to be varying like, oh, we are a vendor for this specific aspect of compliance or this, but now it was essentially 80% at least AI compliance tools
Right.
that they were developing, which is fascinating.
Yeah, that's how you get funding, to be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that does make sense. I mean, if you're, any kind of reporting or like fetching of information or digesting of large data sources that's not using AI is kind of a waste of time at this point.
100% agree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Hey, thanks, Doc.